Hello guys. In this part, I want to talk about the physiology of respiration. First, you need to know that the respiration is a general term for the exchange of respiratory gases, oxygen and carbon dioxide, between the atmosphere and the systemic cell of the body. It's organized into four continuous occurring processes. The first one is called pulmonary ventilation. The pulmonary ventilation is the movement of gases between atmosphere and the alveoli. The next process is called alveolar gas exchange or external respiration. This is the exchange of gases between alveoli and blood, and it happens through the respiratory membrane, which I talked about it in the previous video. After that, we have gas transport, the transport of gases in the blood between lung and the systemic cells of the body. And the last part is called systemic gas exchange or internal respiration. And this is the exchange of gases between the blood and the systemic cells. These are the process which we have in respiration. And I want to talk about the diagram in the next slide. Look at this slide. In this slide, first you can see the pulmonary ventilation. During pulmonary ventilation, the air which contain oxygen come inside and the air which contain carbon dioxide go out. When the oxygenated air come inside our lung, it passes through the passageway which we have in our respiratory center, pass through the nasal cavity, nasopharynx, and then it comes to the trachea, main bronchi. After that, we have lobar bronchi, segmental bronchi, a smaller one, and then it comes to bronchioles. First, we have respiratory bronchiole, terminal bronchiole, and after that we have respiratory bronchiole. And then the air comes to the alveolar duct, alveolar sac, and alveolus. When it reaches this part, we have alveolar gas exchange. Through the respiratory membrane, the oxygen come to our blood and the carbon dioxide go to the opposite direction. After that, our blood become oxygenated. This blood come out of our lung by the pulmonary vein. It goes to our heart first, and then by the aorta, it's distributed in all parts of our body. And in the systemic gas exchange, oxygen go to our cells and carbon dioxide come out. The blood containing carbon dioxide move to our heart by the superior and inferior vena cava and also the coronary sinus. After that, by the pulmonary arteries, it goes to our lung, and the carbon dioxide from the blood go to our alveoli, and after that, by the pulmonary ventilation, the air which contain carbon dioxide can come out of our body. So these are the process which we have for our respiration: pulmonary ventilation, alveolar gas exchange, gas transport, and systemic gas exchange. Now, I want to talk about the pulmonary ventilation. The pulmonary ventilation is the air movement, and we have two cycles for pulmonary ventilation. One of them is called inspiration. Inspiration means bringing air to our lung, and the other name of inspiration is inhalation. And the other one is called expiration, when the air forced out of our lung, and we call it exhalation. We have two types of breathing. One type of breathing is called quiet breathing, and this is the rhythmic breathing that occurs at first. And the other type of breathing is called forced breathing, and this is the vigorous breathing that accompanies across or hard exertion of the air. The autonomic nuclei which we have in our brainstem can regulate our breathing activity. The skeletal muscles go to contraction and relaxation, and they change the volume of our thorax or thoracic cavity. The volume changes result in the pressure gradient between lung and atmosphere, and then the air can go out by the pressure gradient. And now I want to talk about these different processes. What happened in the skeletal muscle of our thorax? What happened to the volume changes? What happened to the pressure gradient? And how the air can come inside or go out? So the mechanism of our breathing has different steps. The first one is the action of a skeletal muscle of breathing. The other one is dimensional change in the thoracic cavity. After that, we have change in the pressure resulting from the volume changes, and then we have pressure gradient and volume and pressure associated with breathing. And in the following slide, I will talk about all of them. Before I start talking about this mechanism, I want to introduce the breathing muscles to you. We have two groups of muscles. One group of muscle are used for inhalation, and one group of muscle is used for exhalation. One group of muscle are used for quiet breathing, and one group can be used for forced breathing. And now I want to introduce this muscle to you. First, look at this picture. I hope you remember the sternocleidomastoid here. The sternocleidomastoid, which we have on both sides, start from our clavicle and the manubrium of our sternum and go and attach to our mandible, temporal bone. And this is the sternocleidomastoid. Above the sternocleidomastoid on both sides we have a splenius. Also, we have some muscles which we call them serratus posterior superior, which you can see it here. We have pectoralis muscle, which you can see in this picture. Also, we have transverse thoracic, serratus posterior inferior, internal intercostal muscle, external abdominal oblique, and transverse abdominis. And you can see external intercostal and the diaphragm in this picture too. Some of these muscles are used for quiet breathing. When you want to do inhalation, your diaphragm and external intercostal muscle go to contraction. By contraction of these two muscles, the cavity of our chest increases. Because when our diaphragm go to contraction, it comes down. You see that the diaphragm is dome shape, and when it goes to contraction, it comes down and it's located like this. So you see that this space is added to our thoracic cavity. And when we add this space, the cavity of our chest increase and we can do breathing. The other muscle is external intercostal muscle. By contraction of this muscle, our thoracic cavity and our thoracic chest can go up. The muscles which we use for exhalation during rest is internal intercostal muscle, which you can see them here, and also the diaphragm. During exhalation, the diaphragm should go up again, and the internal intercostal muscle can depress our thoracic cage. So the cavity of our chest decrease in its size, and then we can do exhalation. But sometimes we want to do deep breathing. When we want to do deep breathing, the other muscles can help us. One of them is sternocleidomastoid, splenius, serratus posterior superior, pectoralis minor, and erector spinae, which we have on both sides of our vertebral column. all of them can help our thoracic cavity to go up and outward. So the chest increase in its size and we can do inhalation. And we use some muscles to do exhalation, forced exhalation. One of them is transverse thoracic, which you can see it here. One of them is serratus posterior inferior, internal intercostal muscle, and also the muscles which we have in our abdominal wall, like external abdominal oblique and transverse abdominis. They can help us when we want to do forceful exhalation. And in this picture, it divides the muscles for you. The muscles which we can use for forced inspiration and the muscles which we can use for forced expiration. The function of all of these muscles are this. When we want to do inhalation, they should increase the size of our thoracic cavity, and when we want to do exhalation, they should decrease the size of our thoracic cavity. Now, look at this picture. In this picture, you can see what happened during mechanism of what happened during our breathing and what is the mechanism of our breathing. During breathing, we need to change the volume of our thoracic cavity. If you look at this picture, you see that at the time of inspiration, we should increase the thoracic cavity volume. And at the time of expiration, we should decrease this thoracic cavity. Thoracic cavity can change in different dimensions. As you see here, we can change the size of our thoracic cavity vertically. And when we want to change it vertically, the diaphragm go to contraction and vertical dimension of our thoracic cavity increase. It happened during inspiration. And when we want to do expiration, the diaphragm relax and it goes up again, and vertical dimension of the thoracic cavity narrows. We have some lateral changes in our thoracic cavity dimension. During inspiration, our ribs elevated and the thoracic cavity widened, as you see here. And during expiration, you see that the ribs are depressed and the thoracic cavity narrows. And we have some changes in anterior-posterior aspect. During inspiration, the inferior portion of our sternum moves anterior and the thoracic cavity expands. And during expiration, the inferior portion of the sternum move posterior or move back and the thoracic cavity compress. So these are the happenings which we have in the volume changes in our thoracic cavity. So you have some lateral dimension changes, you have anterior-posterior dimension changes, and also you have vertical changes. I want to talk about a law which we have in physics. This law is called Boyle's law, Boyle's gas law. In this law, it talks about the relationship which we have between the volume and pressure. If you look at this container, you can figure it out easily. You have a container and the amount of blood in this container. And this is a piston which we put it on top of our container. If the piston come up, the cavity in our container increase. When the cavity and the volume increase, the pressure decrease. And when we push the piston down and when we decrease the volume and the cavity, the pressure of our gases or the pressure which we have inside goes up. So the size of our cavity or the volume and the pressure of the gases are related to each other inversely. So they have inverse relationship, and we call it Boyle's law, and we can use it when we want to talk about the physiology of inhalation and exhalation. And the air pressure gradient is the gradient or is the force which help movement of gases. It's like diffusion. The air or the gas like to flow from the place where the pressure is higher to the place where the pressure is lower until the pressure on both sides become equal. In the first picture, you see that the pressure in area A and in area B are the same, so we don't have any net movement. In picture B, you see that the area in part B is more than the area or the space which we have in part A. So the pressure of air in part A is more than part B. So the air like to come down from A to B until the pressure on both sides become equal. And in the third picture, you see that area B has little space and area A has larger space. So the pressure in B is more than in A, and the air likes to move from B to A until the pressure becomes equal on both sides. The alveolar volume is the collective volume of alveoli. I told you that we have about 300 million alveoli in our lungs. And when we add all of the volume of the alveoli, we can use this term. We call it alveolar volume. And intrapulmonary pressure is the pressure which we have in our alveoli. This intrapulmonary pressure fluctuates with breathing, maybe higher, lower, or equal to the atmosphere pressure. And these changes and this fluctuation help us to do inhalation and exhalation. Sometimes the pressure inside is more than the atmosphere, so the air likes to go out. We call it expiration. Sometimes the pressure outside and inside our lung are the same, so we don't have any inspiration or expiration, and sometimes the pressure of atmosphere is more than the pressure which we have inside our lung, so the air likes to come inside and we call it inhalation. So we have this pressure gradient which help the air to move. The other pressure which you need to know is the intrapleural pressure, the pressure which we have in our pleural cavity. And this pressure fluctuates with breathing. But normally it's lower than the intrapulmonary pressure, and it helps our lung to be inflated all the times. It means that our alveoli are not collapsed on each other, and all the times your lungs are open. And the intrapulmonary pressure is about 4 millimeter of mercury upper than intrapleural pressure. So the intrapleural pressure is lower than intrapulmonary pressure. And we have volume changes create these pressure changes and the airflow down or up when we want to do inhalation and exhalation, and I will talk about them on these pictures. Look at this picture. It talks about the pressures which we have around us and also the pressure inside our body. Here you can see the atmosphere pressure. It's about 760 millimeter of mercury. Between two layers of pleura, the red layer is the visceral pleura and the blue layer is the parietal pleura. Between them we have pleural cavity, and the pressure which we have here is called intrapleural pressure, and this pressure is 756 millimeter of mercury. and the pressure which you have in your lung, which we call it alveolar volume or alveolar pressure or intrapulmonary pressure, is about 760 millimeter of mercury when we are at rest. The rest here means we don't have any inhalation and exhalation. In each minute, you have 12 breathing. So between these 12 breathing, 12 inhalation and exhalation, you have rest time. And during this rest time, you don't have any inhalation and you don't have any exhalation. At this time, the pressure of inside the lung and the atmosphere pressure are the same. Now look at this picture. The blue part talks about quiet respiration or quiet inspiration, and here the pink part shows you quiet expiration, and we want to see what happened here. When we want to do quiet inspiration, first, the atmosphere pressure is 760 millimeter of mercury, and the pressure which you have inside your lung or intrapulmonary pressure is 760, and your diaphragm is dome shape, it's up, as you see here, it's curved, and the pressure in intrapleural cavity, which we call it intrapleural pressure, is 756. Due to this pressure, your lung is inflated. Now you want to do inhalation. When you want to do inhalation, your diaphragm comes down. First, your rib cage goes up and the cavity of your chest increase. Now, look at the pressures here. The pressure in our atmosphere here is 760. The intrapulmonary pressure becomes 759, and the intrapleural pressure is 754. Why these two pressures change? Because your cavity increase. When the size of the cavity increase, the pressure of the air goes down. So the air likes to move from the place where the pressure is higher, and here the atmosphere pressure is higher, to the place where the pressure is lower. So the air comes inside. This is the meaning of inhalation. But what happens during exhalation? When you want to do exhalation, again, first, the atmosphere pressure is 760. The intrapulmonary pressure is 760. And the intrapleural pressure is 754. I hope you remember picture number 2. And now, the diaphragm go to relaxation and come up. Our rib cage goes down, so the cavity of our chest decrease in its size. When the cavity decrease, the pressure of air goes up. Now look at the pressures which we have here. The atmosphere pressure doesn't change. You see that the pressure in your lung is 761, which increased from 760 here, and the pressure in your pleural cavity is 756. Again, this pressure goes up when we compare with previous picture. And now the pressure inside the lung is more than the pressure in our atmosphere. The air likes to move from the part where the pressure is upper to the part where the pressure is lower. So the air goes out. This is the meaning of inhalation and exhalation when we are at rest and when we have quiet breathing. And all of these processes are typed here for you. So You can go over these slides by yourself and you can see what happened during inspiration and expiration, how our diaphragm and internal and external intercostal muscle can change the thoracic cavity. When they change the volume of our thoracic cavity, the pressure of air change and the air comes inside or go out. Now, what happened during forced breathing? The forced breathing involves steps which are similar to quiet breathing, but we have contraction of more muscles here. By this contraction, we have greater changes in thoracic cavity volume. And when the volume change, the intrapulmonary pressure change. So more air can come inside or go out of our lung. And when you are doing workout, you can see the significant changes in your chest volume. You can see the movement of your ribs. This is due to the contraction and relaxation of internal and external intercostal muscle, sternocleidomastoid, splenius, serratus anterior, posterior, pectoralis minor, the muscle which you have in your back, or erector spinae, and also the muscles which you have in your abdomen, like external abdominal, oblique, and transverse abdominis. All of them can change the volume of your chest more. When you have more change in the volume, you have more change in the pressure, and due to pressure gradient, you can do inhalation and exhalation. Now, I want to talk about the nervous control of our breathing. We have autonomic nuclei which are located in our brainstem. We call it respiratory center, and this respiratory center can coordinate our breathing. We have one center in the medulla oblongata, which we call it medullary respiratory center, and one center is located in our pons, and we call it pontine respiratory center. The medullary respiratory center is divided into two parts. One part is located anterior or ventral. We call it VRG or ventral respiratory group. And one part is located dorsally or posterior. We call it DRG or dorsal respiratory group. And let me show you these parts on this picture. In this picture, you can see the brainstem. And in the brainstem, this is the pons, and we have one part here which we call it pontine respiratory center, and this pontine respiratory center is called pneumatotoxic center. I will talk about it later for you. And this part is called medulla. In the medulla oblongata, you have two different parts. One part is located anterior or front or ventral. We call it VRG or ventral respiratory group. And one part is located posterior or dorsal. We call it DRG or dorsal respiratory group. The brainstem neurons influences our respiratory muscles. From the VRG or ventral respiratory groups, we have some signals which come to the skeletal muscles in the spinal cord. And lower motor neurons axon project to our respiratory muscles. Some axon can innervate our diaphragm, and these axons are traveled by a nerve which we call it phrenic nerve, and you can see it here. The phrenic nerve come and it can innervate our diaphragm, and we have some axons which can innervate external and internal intercostal muscle, which you can see it in this pathway. So from the VRG, we have two different neurons which come out. Some neurons can innervate the diaphragm, and some neurons can innervate your internal and external intercostal muscle. But how our brainstem knows to change the rhythm of our breathing, and how it knows that we should do inhalation or exhalation. We have some receptors which are located in different parts of our body. Some of these receptors are chemoreceptors. Chemoreceptors are the receptors which monitor the changes which we have in the pressure of oxygen, pressure of carbon dioxide, and also the amount of hydrogen ion and the pH of our blood. Some of these receptors are called central chemoreceptors. These central chemoreceptors are located in medulla. And this is the central chemoreceptor, and all the times they monitor the CSF, cerebrospinal fluid. You need to know that every changes which we have in our blood, in the amount of oxygen, the amount of carbon dioxide, and the pH of blood can change the pH and the amount of oxygen and carbon dioxide in our cerebrospinal fluid. And this central chemoreceptor all the times monitor these changes. And the other receptors, chemoreceptors, which we have in our body are called peripheral chemoreceptors. Some of these peripheral chemoreceptors are carotid bodies, which are located in the bifurcation of internal carotid and external carotid. And some of these peripheral chemoreceptors are located in the aortic arch. And again, they are monitoring the amount of oxygen, the pH of the blood, and the amount of carbon dioxide. When we have any changes here, they become stimulated. Now, first I want to talk a little bit about the pH. Pay attention here. When the amount of carbon dioxide increase in your blood, the carbon dioxide and the water which you have in your blood can combine with each other. And this reaction can make the acid, which we call it carbonic acid. This reaction is done by the aid of one enzyme here, which we have it in our blood, and we call it carbonic anhydrase. And you see that the carbonic acid is produced. The carbonic acid is a very unstable acid, and immediately after production, it's dissociated to hydrogen ion and carbonate. So, when the amount of carbon dioxide in our blood increase, the amount of hydrogen ion increase. And you know that when the amount of your hydrogen ion goes up, it means that the pH of your blood comes down. And this change in the pH can stimulate this central chemoreceptor and also the peripheral chemoreceptors which we have in the aortic bodies and also in our carotid bodies. In our body, we have the other sensory receptors. These sensory receptors are called proprioceptors. The proprioceptors are located in our muscles and joints, and they are stimulated by our body movement. You know that the proprioceptors can monitor your body position all the time. We talked about it in the joint and muscle chapter. The other receptor is called baroreceptors. They are located in the pleura and also the bronchioles, and they can respond to the stretch. Any pressure which we have, pressure changes which we have can stimulate these baroreceptors. And we have some irritant receptors in the air passageway, which is stimulated by the particular material. And all of them can stimulate your central and peripheral center in your stem and brain stem. Sorry. Now, when we want to have quiet breathing, we have these steps. Inspiration begins when our ventral respiratory group fires, when they become stimulated. When these centers become stimulated, the nerve signals are sent from VRG to nerve pathway. Do you remember I told you that these VRG can innervate the diaphragm and intercostal muscles? So when we have the signals from this VRG, the diaphragm and external intercostal muscle go to contraction. When they go to contraction, they increase the volume of our chest and the air flows inside. This is the breathing. Inhalation. The quiet expiration occurs when our VRG is inhibited. You need to know that your quiet expiration is a passive process. It's not active. When we don't have any signal from VRG, our diaphragm goes back. And for quiet expiration, we don't need actually contraction of internal intercostal muscle. Just the diaphragm goes up, it can decrease the size of our chest and the air can go out. But when we want to do forceful exhalation, then we need to stimulate some parts of our brainstem to do forceful exhalation. Expiratory neurons send inhibitory signals back, which is the negative feedback loop. And signals no longer sent to inspiratory muscles for about 3 seconds. The diaphragm and external intercostal relax and they cause the air to go out. And this is the meaning of passive process which we have for expiration. The respiration rate for normal person is 12 to 15 breathing per each minute. The quiet breathing is called apnea. And the pontine respiratory center can facilitate the smooth transition between inspiration and expiration. It can send signals to the medullary respiratory center, and when we have damage to our pons, this smooth transition is affected, and we have erratic breathing. Between our inspiration and expiration, you can see some difficulties. They cannot change to each other easily. And the apnea is the absence of breathing, can occur voluntarily when you close or you close your nose or hold your breathing, and when you want to swallow, we have apnea. And when you are swimming underwater, you can hold your breathing and we call it apnea. And can be drug induced and can result from neurological diseases or trauma. And we have the apnea, which we call it sleep apnea. And this is the temporary cessation of breathing during sleeping. We have some reflexes which can alter breathing rate and breathing depth. The chemoreceptors alter breathing by sending signals to DRG, which are then relayed to VRG. The VRG triggers changes in rhythm and force of breathing. Rate changes by altering amount of time in inspiration and expiration, and depth change by stimulation of some accessory muscle. So the VRG can change both rhythm of our breathing and force of our breathing. The depth of your breathing is changed by the contraction and relaxation of more muscles, and the rate of your breathing changes and decrease the resting time between each inhalation and exhalation. And ventilation increase in response to central chemoreceptors, which detect increased hydrogen ion concentration in CSF. I told you that when the amount of carbon dioxide increase, the amount of hydrogen ion increase, the pH of our blood comes down, and when the pH comes down, these central chemoreceptors can detect it in our central CSF, or cerebrospinal fluid. And peripheral chemoreceptors, which are located in aortic bodies and carotid bodies, can detect increase in the amount of hydrogen or the pressure of carbon dioxide in our blood. And increased ventilation expel more carbon dioxide out. When you send more carbon dioxide out, again, the pH of your blood goes back to the normal pH, which is 7.2 to 7.4. And you know that this pH is a little alkaline pH. And ventilation decrease if chemoreceptors detect decrease in hydrogen ion concentration or the pressure of carbon dioxide. So when the pressure of your carbon dioxide or the amount of hydrogen is normal and below than normal in your blood, then you don't have any ventilation. So your ventilation comes down. And we have some reflexes which can alter our breathing rate and the depth of our breathing. They're altering breathing through other receptors. I told you that we have proprioceptors which can show us the body movement. When you are doing workout, the activity of your body increase, so the joints and your muscles work more. Proprioceptors become stimulated more, and when they become more stimulated, they send more impulses to the breathing center, and the depth and also the rate of your breathing goes up. And baroreceptors, which you have in the visceral pleura and bronchial smooth muscles, again, when they become overstretched, when more you eat more air, when you engulf more air, they can send impulse and signals to the respiratory center when they become overstretched. And some parts of our brain can change the breathing rate. One of them is our hypothalamus. The hypothalamus increase breathing rate when our body is warm. What happened here? By breathing, we can send more heat out of our body. So this is one response when we are in the hot room, in the hot environment. Your breathing rate increase and you can send more heat out of your body. It happens during fever. During fever, the rate and depth of our breathing increase. And when we have hypothermia, the rate and depth of our breathing decrease. And it happens in hibernating animals. You see that during hibernation, the rate of the respiration decrease because the animal wants to reserve more energy in their body. The limbic system can alter breathing rate in response to emotion. When you become emotional, when you fall in love, at that time, the rate and depth of your breathing change. The frontal lobe of the cerebral cortex can control the voluntary changes in breathing pattern. So what is the function of the frontal lobe? It works with the motor neurons. So when the motor neurons become more stimulated, then the rate and depth of your breathing goes up. In the next part of my video, I will talk about the airflow, pressure gradient, and the resistance which we have in our respiratory center.